Recording.
Hello. My name is Kareem Isaac and Devan.
Hi, my name is Devan Rowland. Sierra.
Hi, I'm Sierra Piggies. Journey.
Hi, I'm Journey Sims, Christina.
Hi, I'm Christina Colas.
And we're going to be looking at Spike Lee's most recent work, The Five Bloods. It's his most recent work coming out in 2020, and it focuses on the story of five Black GI soldiers as they go to recover one of their fallen brothers' remains in the jungles of Vietnam. It's a movie that kind of goes back and forth between time periods, mainly focusing on their time in Vietnam and where they are now in the present. So I guess, does anyone want to start off talking about anything? Actually, we can go from anywhere.
I guess I will go. So I was assigned costumes and mise en scene. And basically the things that I noticed consisted of a couple of things. The most important costumes are, I would say personally, just Paul, Otis, and David. 2 out of 5 of the Five Bloods, and then Paul's son, David. So Paul, throughout the film, wears a red Make America Great Again hat because after the war, he was so traumatized basically by the events of Vietnam that he completely went pro-America and just thought that, giving himself and his all to America would, rid him of the demons of the things that he witnessed and experienced in Vietnam. His son David is a proud Morehouse graduate, and he is often seen in their attire. This could be in part to Spike Lee, giving an homage to a school that he went to, and also, just to the Black community in general, as well as, David's pride in being a Black man and his, comfort in himself, even though he does not have a great relationship with his father, who is very emotionally and verbally abusive towards him. And then finally, like I said, Otis, he is kind of the ringleader of the group. He's not very dominant the way Paul is. He's more so, calm, cool, collected, very professional. He's constantly seen in button downs, straight leg pants. And we find out in the film that, he has connections in Vietnam that, last him to this day. And those three characters really just are the central theme of, the brotherhood, the connection, just the entirety of the movie. They drive the story, the plot line. And then in terms of mise en scene, most of the film takes place in the Vietnam jungle. And this is because, as we heard from Kareem, they are going back to retrieve their fallen brothers' remains, as well as a gold that they left buried before they left Vietnam. In the jungle, the background of the scene is very much green everywhere. When they're going through the swamplands, everything is green, but it's only counteracted by the amount of blood that's seen in flashback scenes and then throughout the film when anything happens. So the contrast of the red blood between the green backgrounds is very important in this film. So those are just two things that I noticed about the costumes and the mise en scene.
So I have a question. How did you feel about Paul and his MAGA hat, and just when his son is representing powerfulness and Black unity? How do you feel about Paul wearing the MAGA hat?
I think that Paul is very emotionally damaged, which is probably why he's wearing the MAGA hat. I think that he doesn't contact his trauma much like many Black men do. Like, he continues to bury his issues, and he talks in his sleep. We hear that he has night terrors, things like that push you to a certain level that I think if he had never experienced Vietnam, he probably wouldn't have been a Trump supporter. But I think he likes the idea of, a proud America, a place where he can be happy and, have such pride in, but he doesn't have that. So he goes the route of becoming a Trump supporter because he knows America isn't great. But he thinks that this person is the one who's gonna, bring it back to the greatness and the glory of when he came back from being a soldier.
Yeah. And to go back on that, like, I noticed that when they were going on the boat ride to retrieve Norm's body, Paul's son David and Otis had a conversation, and it was more so that Paul, he kind of didn't have anyone else to believe in, like you said, because Norm was his everything. Norm was his commander in chief, and just like Otis said, Norm was their Martin and Malcolm. They were huge assets to what was going on during the 60s and 70s during that time of the Vietnam War. And since he lost Norm and saw the tragedy of what happened when he was killed, it kind of didn't make sense. Like nothing made sense to him after that. And he kind of didn't believe in anything. And I guess he kind of clutched on the idea that his patriotism got him through the Vietnam War, which is why he was so pro-Trump and why his outfit kind of reflects that.
Right.
I think to kind of go off this, I think their costumes kind of reflect their different personalities and mental states. So I think if we want to talk, so I think so through that, I think we can understand that Paul, the costume choice in Paul's character arc shows that he's ultimately kind of a victim of his trauma, right? His trauma basically, like he's a truly he's a damaged individual, like all the other people, like all the other soldiers in the film. The war has shown has done some damage to him. Paul, I think, is the one where it's the most like visible with him, especially as reaction to almost any sort of Vietnamese person he sees. He has like a very visceral negative reaction, like a paranoid reaction, as if like everyone is out to kill him.
That's
I think,
really good.
yeah.
Does anyone else want to talk about so anyone talk about any other person's costumes? I think we also mentioned David, Paul's son. So does anyone want to talk about why the director Spike Lee chose that particular costume, or why you think what that may have to do with his character?
Yeah, I mean, to just go back off of what Devan said, he was supposed to be like, a powerhouse of Black excellence. And I just wanted to give a shout out to David's character for, coming from a person like Paul. I mean, I can't imagine, what that's like to be raised by someone who is constantly, verbally abusive. I'm sure that, there was physical abuse that was, involved in his upbringing. And for him to just have been so confident in self, and for him to even take that journey with them, I found that to be interesting. So yeah, to talk about him being a powerhouse, that sort of represents that.
Mm-hmm. Christina, do you have anything you want to say?
Sorry if I keep going in and out. The Wi-Fi is like going good, so I'm just gonna pop in and out what I can.
No, you're fine. But I was wondering if you have anything you want to say in regards to the costume and how it may reflect the different characters.
Just piggybacking off what Sierra said, I think that it was really interesting to see the transition in the characters.
All right, so what do you think about like Melvin, like in his costume, and like how do you think that reflects his character traits?
So Melvin
sorry.
was very much, oh, go ahead.
No, you're good. You're good.
So Melvin was very much kind of the fun one. He was, seen wearing a lei. He had a Kangol hat at one point, and he just kind of liked to have fun. I think he was the most laid back of all of them. And I think part of that is due to, just after the war, he didn't dwell on the trauma. He kind of just decided to move on with his life and move forward, and he didn't have the specific trauma that Paul had, the guilt that Paul had. So he was able to move forward with his life a little bit easier. He's seen just kind of wearing jeans, very calm attire. He doesn't ever really sweat the heavy stuff, which is as seen in, he just kind of wears t-shirts and jeans, and, he has his little hats and things like that, but he's not very complex as a physical appearance.
Okay, so I guess if you had to pick like a main character, like whose story do you think it is? Or do you think like there's not really a main character?
I would
for
say,
sure is a main character.
yeah. I would say the main character is Paul, just based off of, the amount of time we spend with him. I mean, he gets that final Spike Lee scene of speaking to the camera. So that's just my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So actually, so let's kind of move on to now like camera work. If anyone wants to talk about that. So what have they noticed about some of the choices the director made when actually filming? Like how do they film a particular scene and editing as
So
well?
I sorry. So I
No,
noticed
you
that
did.
like it kind of had like a dramatic building from one scene to the next, I guess, to kind of make the outcome more dramatic. And in the opening montage, it was talked about that that the I'm sorry, that the scenes that he needed to put from the Vietnam War was very hard to find just because it was so, oh my God. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So it was very hard to find. Just the opening montage was very difficult to find just because there was not a lot of Black videos, or they didn't take a lot of scenes for Black people back then. So it just made it really hard to find. And then I noticed that with the visual dynamics, there were a lot of double cuts. And I think that kind of went into like the surprise versus suspense. And like an example of that would be like them walking through the minefields and things like that. And I noticed that he moved between like the 5.1 surround sound and stereo. I kind of like went into like the specifics of editing, and you could see like the different types of sounds that he uses, created more suspense and added to just the overall movie.
In regards to editing, I also liked how he would kind of alter like almost the aspect ratio of like the actual camera. So during flashback scenes, he would kind of adjust like the aspect ratio of the film so it looked like flashback scenes are being filmed like from a 1970s-esque camera, like almost as if the audience is the now recording the soldiers and their actions in Vietnam.
Well, he kind of had to because the actors themselves, they played their character from the Vietnam War to the present day. And it was kind of
Mhm.
like he kind of had to make that choice considering that they still kind of looked their age. And realistically, everyone would have known, okay, there's no way he still looks the exact same way that he did from the Vietnam War to now, especially considering that they were taking young Black soldiers to Vietnam to fight, and a lot of old vets as well.
Mhm.
I love that Christina had mentioned the opening montage because that part really stuck out to me. Like, honestly, after watching it, I really didn't even want to watch the movie because just seeing the scenes from like, you know, the gentleman that got assassinated, the mother that was running through with the burned babies, a person being lit on fire. I mean, it was just awful. Like, it was absolutely disgusting. And, you know, I appreciated him for really showing those scenes, Spike Lee, excuse me, just because of the fact that it's necessary for us to really talk about the actual impact of war. I mean, I know a lot of the times that we watch war movies and it's very romantic. And Spike Lee was honest. With the fact that it is not as, you know, oh, you know, someone got their leg blown off but they've got a purple heart and it's okay. Like, no, I mean, there was real cost. Like, we have actual footage of just how easy it was for someone to just walk up to someone and just shoot them on scene, or how, you know, babies were being impacted by this, and, you know, that mother had to go on in her life. I mean, it was just absolutely traumatic for me as the viewer, as well as those people who had to go through it. And even, you know, Muhammad Ali and him talking about his refusal to go into the draft. I thought that montage was very courageous. His monologue, excuse me, about, you know, the reason why he didn't want to go to the war, because those weren't his enemies. So, you know, I feel like Spike really set the scene, you know, transitioning from what Christine was talking about as far as editing and how that plays into the psychological impact. I feel like he really set the scene for us to know what we were getting into in this movie, that it was going to be a bit different from some of the traditional war movies out there.
I think to kind of go off of it, I think it's almost best if we look at it. It's a semi-war movie, but I think it's also more of a post-war movie. I think this movie focuses less on the actual Vietnam War itself and more of like the ramifications of that war. Like of 40, 50 years later, like what was the impact of the war? You know, we see with Tien and the fact that with Tien and I believe it was it Otis or Mel It
Otis.
was Otis,
It was
right?
Otis.
It was Otis, and how Otis and Tian had a daughter that Otis did not know about the entire time. It talked about, again, the theme of soldiers with PTSD. It's almost, the movies, I feel like it's more about the after, what happens after the war rather than the war itself. I mean, sure, there are plenty of scenes that take place in the Vietnam War and shows like what the soldiers did, but I think as a focus, it focuses more on the after part.
I
I don't
think
know.
it's a mixture of both because, like, even with the dialogue that they have, like, the montage itself in the beginning, it kind of sets you up for how the soldiers were feeling and how they're feeling now. So I feel like because it sets up the movie itself, considering how Muhammad Ali and even Bobby Seale, I believe, talked about how they're in this war fighting for the people who won't even give them freedom. And these soldiers are still feeling that kind of tension between the USA, which is why they kind of, the brotherhood was kind of united from the beginning because they had no one else to back them up. The white soldiers didn't care about the black soldiers that were fighting in the Vietnam War alongside them. And even with, I think it was Norm talking about how we're on the front lines and we're getting killed off like flies while they sit back at home and not care a world about what's going on in our lives, and how we have Martin Luther King just got assassinated and we're sitting here fighting for our lives and fighting for the white man when we should be there fighting for our people's rights and freedom. We're not fighting for our freedom here. We're fighting for justice for the white man who doesn't care about us. And I kind of like the montage itself and the dialogue that's in between the scenes and along the movie. I think it's like the first hour kind of shows you like why they united such a brotherhood, and also why Spike Lee kind of brought in the whole idea of freedom itself and the blackness and unity of a brotherhood.
Journey, I
So
think that was a sorry.
no,
I
no,
was
no,
just
no,
gonna
no.
say,
Go ahead, Karen.
Journey had mentioned that when they had talked about, you know, them coming back from war, that stuck out to me too. When Paul had said, we came back for war and they were calling us baby killers. I can't imagine what that feels like. And then I think about, you know, I think they were talking about at the radio station, the lady had mentioned something and they were playing Marvin Gaye, which I know that we're going to be talking about the musical impact in a second. But that song was just absolutely perfect to illustrate this movie. Wouldn't you say, Kareem?
Okay, how the music kind of correlates with the theme, but I'll go more in depth with that, I think, right after this. Yeah, I guess actually that's a great transition. So I guess now we'll talk. So now I'll just talk about music, and I'll give an open floor to anyone who wants to kind of add or want to anything that they themselves saw. So the music in this film is used. It's used a lot like you would see in other films. So music is constantly used to kind of set the mood of a scene. So, for example, in the beginning, when we actually see the five bloods, oh my gosh, I cannot speak. The five bloods go and actually get the gold. It's almost like a very heroic style of music. It casts the men as these heroes, almost like it's almost like they're saving Private Ryan. We're completing the mission, we're storming the beach moment. And it's like it's a very heroic scene. This is actually contrasted to another flashback scene where they're lying in the grass, like almost waiting to get the jump on the patrol. And in this case, the film actually decides to use a lack of music, if you will. And the lack of music is used to kind of, one, set a more realistic tone, but two, almost create a sense of dread or tension among the audience. Like, we don't know when the fighting will happen. It's almost like we know the fighting is going to happen, but we don't know when. So when the first gunshot is fired, it's a very loud audio stimulus. So it almost kind of like jumps the audience, just as it would be had they actually been in the jungle themselves. But alongside its own original soundtrack, the film also makes great use of licensed music, with the one artist frequently appearing is Marvin Gaye. And in particular, they pick his 1971 album, What's Going On. as both, and I think the reason why Spike Lee chose this is because both the album and the film touch on the same theme, which is Black GIs in Vietnam, and in particular, them returning for the soldier. We'll look at the perfect example of how Marvin Gaye is used to articulate the theme. It actually goes back to that beginning montage, which almost acts as like an abstract. The film or research paper, this is the abstract. This is the summary of here, hey, here's what we're going to talk about. So in the opening montage, alongside with all the scenes we see, the film uses the Marvin Gaye song Inner City Blues, Make Me Wanna Holler, which is again off of his 1971 album, What's Going On. And in this song, Marvin Gaye is citing numerous lyrics such as like the NASA moon launching, and talks about how this money that we use for the moon launch could have been used to help people here in the country back home who are poor. And we see like a sign articulating that a very similar message in that montage. It also talks about let me see. It also talks about like how bills are piling up sky high, people getting poorer and poorer and poorer, and we're sending soldiers off to die. So the Marvin Gaye that's constant. Marvin Gaye almost kind of acts like a summary of a point, if you will.
Right. And I think that's really interesting actually that you say that, because now that you're saying that, thinking about the lyrics of Inner City Blues, they're talking about, you know, people going poor. Eddie goes poor at one point. And then we also have, you know, I'm sorry, you said something along the lines of basically like that you could have used the money for the moon launch, that, you know, to fund inner city families and things like that. And it's really interesting that that's what some of the soldiers wanted to do with their money, was, you know, put it back into the community and, you know, help people. And Paul being the only one who kind of wanted to keep it for himself because he feels as though he's worked hard for it and he's gone through so much, you know, that he's earned this money. This is not something that he has to distribute through the community. And that's his, you know, God-given right. It's this connection of people didn't help me, so now I'm not going to help people. And also other people being like, you know, I've seen so much in my life that's horrible. I don't want to have the opportunity to help and not help. And I think that song really kind of just ties the entirety of the movie together.
Okay, that's great. That's great. Anything else? Anyone else? Oh, it's also actually, I guess I'll have to highlight this. So when looking at the original soundtrack titles, a lot of the song titles literally match the scene of what's going on. So, for example, one of the songs, one of the original songs, like these are like songs, like they have like lyrics in them, and they're more like just, you know, like the music that's playing in the actual scene
Instrumental.
itself. So we'll literally have they'll either like the song title will either like be a line from the actual scene itself or like what the scene is about. So for example, when Tien introduces Otis to his daughter for the first time, the music that's playing is literally called Tien and Daughter Talk. We also see What's This Missing About, which is again a line quoted from Norm, the fallen soldier, who says, hey, what's this missing about? Why are we here in the first place, basically?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that you're saying. I was actually kind of shocked to see Marvin Gaye being portrayed in that sort of light. I don't listen to a lot of Marvin Gaye, but my mom does. And she was like, I guess, shocked at the fact that Spike Lee utilized Marvin Gaye in such a smart way, because everyone from her generation knows Marvin Gaye for like romantic music and almost, I guess, talking about the trials and tribulations that he has himself had to go through. So to utilize his lyrics in a way to where it relates to the storyline and the characters itself kind of was smart of Spike Lee to use that in the whoever produced the music for the movie and whoever utilized the music for the movie as well. It was very smart of them to use it that way.
So I guess the man behind the individual behind the Five Blood soundtrack is Terrence Blanchard. I also, so in preparation for this, I did some quick research kind of behind like the story of the album that he used. And so Marvin Gaye himself said that the album came about from reading letters of one of his brothers who was in Vietnam and like seeing his experiences. Okay, so that's it for music. So does anyone have any final thoughts, anything they want to wrap up? Sierra, Christina, do you two have anything you want to say?
Well, I'm excited to hear Journey's take on the acting.
Okay, okay. And on that point, we'll transition to acting. So Journey, the floor is all yours.
Okay, so I just gotta first say that Isaiah Whitlock Jr. did his thing in that movie. I don't care what anyone else says. Paul's not my favorite character at all. I cannot stand the man. But Melvin is my favorite character out of the whole cast. But that's neither here nor there. But I do want to talk about how the Five Bloods in the beginning, the acting was very sincere. They were they showcased a brotherhood that kind of felt like it was unbreakable and like it was a very safe space for everyone to be in. And it even followed decades after the war, which is kind of amazing because a lot of people, considering like a lot of people have PTSD after wars, they might not want to be reminded of the trauma that they've been through by being with their friends, even though they've been through the same thing. So it was kind of amazing that Spike Lee kind of showed us the brotherhood in such a strong, unified way. But with that being said, I do feel like he made a lot of good choices regarding the character's individuality as well. Like Devan said earlier on, how Melvin was more of how he was dressed playfully and almost kind of like a fun way, that kind of showcased his character and how he acted, which was great because Isaiah Whitlock Jr., you kind of look at him and you're like, oh, he's such a big teddy bear, which you can't give him such a hard role in the movie, like make him play such a mean character like Paul was, if he like of the way his character looks and also the way he is portrayed as an actor and the way he acts himself. So with that, he was one of the funny characters. He kind of broke the ice between a lot of tension that was going on, especially when when they were trying to figure out how they were going to divvy up the gold with the people from Lamb. And he made the comment, why don't you just sell the gold on Craigslist? That was my favorite line out of the whole movie. But with that, he kind of broke the ice and the tension, and he's kind of I guess the class clown, if you will, in the movie, which is great because you don't want to sit through like a tragic war story and just have to sit through there and cry the whole time if you're kind of trying to enjoy the, I guess, cheerfulness that came out of being in Vietnam and surviving the Vietnam War. And with Paul, he was more so, I don't know how to define Paul because he was a trip. He was very much a trip. But Delroy Lindo did his thing with Paul. He did showcase PTSD very well. I've actually met with a person who fought in the Vietnam War. My grandfather fought in the Vietnam War, and he kind of told me a lot of things that I wouldn't necessarily get at such an age, especially not experiencing that myself, which kind of made me go back to Paul and think about the story that I was told and how Spike Lee portrayed it. Because Paul, you really do see his PTSD going through, and you see there's a lot of character growth in between how he deals with his PTSD, but it's not so much in a healthy and safe way, especially considering that he has such a battalion of friends who are there to help him get through it, especially like his son was trying to help him through a lot of things and he just wouldn't take it. But with that being said, does anyone want to add on?
Well, I had to jump in, of course, because and defend my good friend Paul, because he was definitely my favorite actor throughout the movie. I enjoyed Melvin too, but I don't know. Now I feel problematic enjoying the most problematic character, or maybe I'm a sucker because he had the most screen time and his sort of in scene, as Devan had mentioned. So the reason why I had connected with Paul's character so much, especially with me looking at the psychological impact, as Journey mentioned, there was just so much there, right? So, for one, we know that he harbored a very dark secret, being that he was the one who actually killed their troop leader Norman. He panicked at a surprise attack by a Vietnamese soldier, and he didn't have time to think cautiously and rationally before he ended up firing off his gun without even being able to see his target. And so, that was a lot of guilt that he had carried around with him, right? I feel like Spike Lee wanted us to really wanted the viewer to be just as traumatized as the characters were. And Journey, you even mentioned that your grandfather had fought in Vietnam. I think this movie was so important because the Vietnam War, it's the largest modern day impact on Black soldiers that we're connected to, right? I mean, everybody's family structure is different, but for a lot of us, these are our grandparents or maybe even grandparents, and they're maybe still living. If they're not still living, we had some connections with them in our lifetime, have had a chance to maybe even observe their PTSD or other things that they brought back with them from that war over time, or even just take in some of those stories. And so, again, watching the movie can definitely be a traumatic experience, but it was necessary because we had to acknowledge the human consequence, and specifically the Black human consequence of war. When movies, they acknowledge Black soldiers, it's very romantic, as we talked about before. Even when they're dying, you may feel even some pride or some secondhand remorse for how society may have treated them. But, those are some of the undertones I think that Spike Lee was conscious of. And during their mission to retrieve Storm and Norman's body, as well as the gold, they justified their actions as reparations, or specifically Paul. He was very focused on making sure that he could profit from that gold, even though they knew that that would be a suicide mission, or maybe they had wanted to filter it back into the community. And so I personally believe that's the reason why they waited more than 50 years to go back. It seems like they established careers, they established families, because they knew that it's very possible that they were not going to make it back from Vietnam. And so I just found that interesting. And then I'll speak on the one of the maybe main quotes that I took away was before Paul's execution, he said that bloods don't die, we multiply. So shortly after that, it cuts to the scenes of the gold that's being liquidated and is donated to various charitable organizations. They fight back against war, genocide. I feel like that journey was, in a sense, a healing mission for guilt, of course, for not resisting a mandatory war like Muhammad Ali did, which again was very courageous, but just for the various actions that led them to their circumstances.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like it's sort of interesting because when Spike Lee makes this movie, you see a lot of civil rights moments happening. And then you see a lot of Vietnam wars being fought by the Black man and by Black GIs. And it was kind of interesting because they're almost dealing with double trauma. And honestly, I feel like a lot of them felt guilty about not being in America while people are outraged. Like Hannah Hoy, Hanoi Hannah, the Radiohead, she was talking about it and she was saying, there's 120 cities being burned down while you guys are fighting in the Vietnam War. And there's like only 11% of Black people in America, and the 32% of the Black people are fighting in Vietnam and being killed off like flies. And it's kind of interesting because that's a very big impact on the movie and how the movie was made and how people will portray the movie itself.
Really good point.
Okay, so does anyone else want to talk about psychological? So I guess I'll go on psychological impact. So in terms of psychological impact, it's a movie that also heavily focuses on PTSD. I think they use Paul to best demonstrate that. So I think it's definitely a movie. If you can't talk about this movie basically without talking about like the role PTSD plays in it.
For sure. It's just, it's tough because this is real life. It's not a movie. So many men that we know walking around, and it's sad. I kind of think about that. Even we are all connected to DC, so you'll see older Black men walking around on the streets, and they may be homeless or other circumstances may be impacting them, but a lot of the times this is why, and it's really unfortunate. And I'm just glad that we watch this to kind of reset, hit that reset button for all of us.
Yeah, I just want to say for my last remark before we close out, I just wanted to say that I think part of it that's so interesting is that when you think about these Black men, you think about the fact that not everybody had the opportunity to say no. Like Muhammad Ali was able to say no and live because he had already established himself. He had protections and things like that. But the average Black man in America at that time wouldn't have had, the means, the funds, the ability to just kind of say, no, I'm not going, and then continue on with his life. That was just not an option. I think that this movie really speaks to, the corner that Black men are often trapped in America, Black people especially. We don't really have the option to always deny our oppressors, what they want, because they are, they were the majority. And that's just something that stuck with me at the end of the film. So.
Real great point.
Does anyone have any other questions before we close out, anything like that?
No, I would just say recommend watching The Five Bloods when you are not in a great mood, but not in a bad mood.
Okay.
Awesome.
So once again, this has been DPI Group 12 for the Psychology and Media class. We dissected The Five Bloods, and we talk about war, about how can films show war, and particularly the consequences of war.
Okay.
Thank you.
See y'all with the little party emote.
Yay.
Yay. All right. So I think that's it. So I want to do is log off for